Hello there, welcome to my review of the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes, Series 2, Episode 1, The Master Blackmailer. Series 2 and 3 only consists of 3 movie-length episodes, so I'll be grouping all 3 into this one series. The episode begins with the voice of a woman narrating a breakup letter to her lover as we see him read it. He casts it into the fire and storms off, only for the letter to be retrieved by his manservant and delivered to a shadowy figure in exchange for cash. Lots of cash. We are then told that 12 years has passed, and at a country estate, a veiled woman refuses to pay Charles Augustus Milverton, played by Robert Hardy.
I haven't the money even if I wished. How could I without my husband knowing?
I think you'd be exceedingly ill-advised not to make an effort.
You will not have a penny from me, coward!
We then cut to Holmes and Watson listening to a grand old woman tell them of her grandson's troubles with blackmail. One was set up to be photographed in a compromising position, and the other took revenge on the man who set it up. They don't know the name of the blackmailer, but he is known to be prolific amongst high society, and they are desperate to find him.
A master blackmailer. I have heard whisper of him, yet no one has put a name to him.
We then cut to a scene of merriment as a soldier, Colonel Dorking, and his fiancée, Charlotte Miles, discuss with a group of friends their honeymoon plans. Dorking excuses himself to return to a regimental dinner at the barracks, but actually attends a drag show, there to meet the master blackmailer, Charles Augustus Milverton. He too refuses to pay, and so the letters are dispatched to his fiancée, ending their engagement. This is obviously a non-traditional opening for this feature-length episode, as Holmes and Watson are involved from virtually the beginning, and the rest is setting up just how vile, unsympathetic and prolific the blackmailer is. It's quite an achievement to get 3 different blackmail threads all spelled out to us without extraneous exposition, and they achieve it perfectly, showing just enough in just the right locations for us to understand exactly what's going on. As I've mentioned in another review, back in the Victorian era, writing love letters was common practice, even for the most illicit of romances, and using them for blackmail was the equivalent of revenge porn today. It may seem odd that people used such an incriminating form of communication, but there was little other option, and thanks to the love letters that survived the fire, we have a much more rounded picture of what the Victorians were really like when public image was so incongruous with private lives. As a result of his disgrace, Colonel Dorking kills himself rather than live with the shame of a less tolerant age. Lestrade investigates the suicide and finds a letter addressed to Holmes, but is called away, so the Colonel's personal servant hides it away and delivers it to Watson. It gives Holmes Milverton's name, and he exclaims to Watson just how much he despises this particular criminal.
I've had to deal with 15 murderers in my career, but the worst of them never gave me this sense of revulsion that I feel at this moment.
Milverton, meanwhile, receives a visitor, a maid for Lady Eva Blackwell, and she has letters to sell him. Lady Eva is a friend to Charlotte Miles. Her uncle is dying, and her aunt invites her to the unveiling of a portrait that Watson also happens to be attending alone. I feel like the introduction to Lady Eva is a little rushed in an episode that otherwise takes its time to provide us with information, but it's not a huge issue. Also attending the unveiling of the portrait is Milverton, whose face is finally revealed to us, having been hidden up till now, and Watson meets him. Holmes has business elsewhere, though, as he is ingratiating himself with Milverton's maid by posing as a plumber. As he gains the affections of the maid, and appears to, in at least some small way, reciprocate, Lady Eva becomes ensnared in Milverton's blackmail trap. Holmes discovers this as she begs to Milverton that she cannot pay, and he remains unsympathetic.
I can't pay you. I haven't the money to pay you.
You must be resourceful in finding the money.
Give me back my letters. Please.
Milverton continues to haunt her, giving Holmes and Watson an opportunity to engage her directly.
Boy, get the horse.
After the breakneck pace of the opening, the story slows down significantly in this midsection, as Holmes makes what moves he can, and we see Milverton's modus operandi. It's kept fresh, however, by employing the use of very short scenes in multiple locations that drip-feed the story to us, and it's a very effective way of keeping up the pace. This slower pace ends as the final act begins, when Lady Eva comes to Baker Street, and we get a sort of second opening, as she now engages Holmes on her case, in effect making the first hour an extended prologue, the last act making up a normal episode length. This is a risky approach to have taken, as there's a chance the first two acts could have outstayed their welcome, but they are vital to fleshing out the characters, establishing just how wicked Milverton is and showing us how many lives he has ruined. It also gives us a rear look at Holmes's emotional side, which we see is stunted by his own admission. This is left ambiguous enough that it could all be just an act to gain the information he needs, but through Brett's sensitive performance, it is easy to read more into it.
Heavens, those talks.
But the girl.
Can't be helped, Watson.
With Lady Eva explaining her situation to Holmes, he agrees to try and broker a deal, but Milverton will have none of it. He's either to be paid all of the money or none of it. Milverton attempts a facade of respectability, as if he is duty-bound to reveal the truth, if he's not paid what he asks for. As if it is a fair debt that he is collecting, but he fails to convince Holmes and Watson, or us.
My dear sir, it is painful for me to discuss it, but I can say that all this is done with the most careful consideration.
It certainly feels like he genuinely believes in this worldview, as if to him he is just carrying out his work, completely oblivious to the misery he leaves in his wake. Hardy is superbly cold and uncaring in this role, a true sociopath. Eventually, Holmes arrives at a plan and asks Milverton for a delay in payment of the full amount to the day after Lady Eva has a formal dance arranged, planning to burgle Milverton's house on the night of the dance. Watson strongly advises against this course of action, particularly the inviting of Milverton to the dance as a distraction, as it puts him in the same room as Lady Eva, which might further distress her. But Holmes says he has no option. Unbeknownst to Holmes and Watson, as they make for Milverton's home, Milverton has received a note and is returning home early. As Holmes cracks the safe and burns the incriminating letters, Milverton enters the room, so he and Watson have to hide. As they do so, Milverton receives the guest who summoned him. He believes it's another servant with more private letters.
You say you have 5 letters which compromise? The Comtesse d'Albert?
But it is in fact the woman from the beginning of the story, who is now revealed to be Lady Eva's aunt. She exacts her revenge, years in the making, shooting him dead and disappearing into the night, followed by Holmes and Watson, after they are sure to have destroyed all of Milverton's blackmail material and cleared up evidence of the murderer. In the epilogue, Holmes tells Watson not to record this case, as he is not proud of the work he did on it. This is one of the more melancholic endings for one of the more melancholic stories. Nobody wins in this tale, and so it's only right that there should be no sense of victory. It is a fine example of adaptation, though as the story it's based on is much shorter, but ends on a much lighter note, as Lestrade comes to Baker Street to ask Holmes to help with finding the killers of Milverton, who he believes are the 2 men seen fleeing, but based on his description, Holmes tells him it's so vague as to describe himself and Watson, and he refuses to take the case. It's a fun button to the story, but feels out of place with the seriousness of the villain and the misery he has caused. The episode does suffer a little bit from being a little too long and too slow, despite their efforts to remedy this, but even in its slowness, I still enjoyed it. There are some beautiful character moments throughout, such as Holmes removing the evidence of Milverton's killer, and when Milverton is at the dance and he is fixated only on the jewellery worn by the women, as if he sees them all as potential victims, so fixated as he is on money and money alone. I'm not sure why they chose to keep his face and name hidden from us as long as they did, as the original story is called The Adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton, and he's played by famous British actor Robert Hardy, who would have been well known to British audiences at the time. The only creative choice that makes sense to me is that he supposedly moves under a figurative veil of secrecy, so they gave him a literal veil, but that really doesn't work for me as a metaphor. Interestingly, the character is based on a real-life blackmailer and art dealer, as he is in this episode, named Charles Augustus Howell, who was also murdered in mysterious, unsolved circumstances. Doyle seems to have then extrapolated everything else around this man that he saw as a ruthless predator. On the whole, I think this episode really works well, even if it does borrow from real life and previous Holmes stories a little, and is a little slow and overstretched. So for me, this is a 4 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.